Newman. I'm the Chief Executive Officer for Envision Education, and we have really two branches over the last 20 years. I said 20 years. One is we serve students in the Bay Area. We have 5 schools that we're proud of. And the other arm I'm going to have Alcine talk a little bit about, but we're across the nation doing really great work with deeper learning and kind of partnering with many of you in the work that we do. And so I'm going to pass it to Alcine.
Hi, friends. There's so many familiar faces. This is lovely. I'm Alcine Mumby. I get to work with Envision Learning Partners, which is a part of Envision Schools. And what we get to do is we get to go across the country and help school districts and schools and leaders and teachers develop high-quality performance assessment systems so that they can measure what matters. Because that is also a big component, we believe, in deeper learning, that it's not just about the inputs, but also to making sure that kiddos are able to demonstrate what they know in ways that feel authentic to them. And so also in that job, I get to direct a fellowship where it doesn't make sense, right, to just have schools that are deeper learning and teachers that are deeper learning. We need leaders who can lead that work. And so part of what we do at ELP is we also have Hewlett has funded a fellowship called the Deeper Learning Leadership Forum. And there's some people, hi Kai, she was DLLF 4. And there's several of them. In fact, we have trained 12 leaders in the state of Kentucky have gone through our program, and there's James back there who is a powerhouse of a superintendent at Shelby, and now you're at GREC, right? Yeah, so he's running the deeper learning over there. It's a educational co-op. So anyway, so our reach is big, but we also realized that we needed to train adults. Like, how do we create the spaces for adults to be the deeper learning leaders that their schools and their students need? So that's in short.
Who we are.
Yeah.
And so today we kind of thought about, why are we up here? What are we talking about? And ultimately, we talked a lot about what it means to be Black leaders in this work, what it means to be women in this work, and what it means to kind of talk about stories, and what we want for students is to be able to tell their own stories and find their identity in storytelling. And what you have to do in order to do that is make sure the storyteller is in a place where they're able to unpack their own identity, who they are, and really get to a place of deeper learning themselves. And so that's the work that we have kind of really thought deeply about in our organization, as we have really dedicated our work to being pro-Black, anti-racist. And what does that mean when we're talking about getting to the identity of all people? When we understand the most underserved, but also the idea of colorism over time in each group. So how do we understand that? How do we deeply get to that so that we actually can get to projects, that we can get to the ask of students that is deeper, that in fact allows them to discover something that might be actually larger than what we had imagined ourselves, which is the hard part of teaching, when kids get beyond. And that's actually our gift, what we're trying to do. So our intentionality today is kind of talk about story, and talk about our story, both wins and losses, but also under the journey of deeper learning. What would you add to that?
I would just add that in our field guide, our former CEO, Gia, has this beautiful story. Because there's a story about deeper learning that's just like, deeper learning is not for Black folk, right? This is a space that historically has been very white. We have gotten better, and then the pandemic hit, and so now we're rebuilding, right? But it's also, we have faced various resistance as Black women leading this work, coming from various sectors, right? So, Jillian will share her story about seeking funding for the kids who look like us to do deeper learning, and the pushback that we get around whether that is the right thing to be doing with students who look like us, right? I can certainly share as a leader that it is, we sometimes think that deeper learning the leadership around that has to look a particular way or be a particular way. And so I'm just really inspired by Gia. In the field book, she says that if you want to change the story, you have to change the storyteller.
That's right. And
so that's what we're doing. We're changing the storytellers. So you get to learn from 2 brilliant Black women today, which is not a common thing. Like, if I were to ask you to raise your hand, and like, how many of you have been formally supervised by a Black woman in your career? Oh, 1, 2, 3, 3 Black women, 4? Oh yeah, I was counting numbers, y'all. Sorry, like 2, 4, 1. Okay, yeah, right? But think about that number in comparison to the amount of like non-black women that we've been able to lead from. And I do think it's a gift because I do think we bring something special to the table, to the party.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So do you want to share about the water system?
I can.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So we're going to talk a little bit around. It is you, but that's okay. I'm gonna flow with you.
Yes,
I'm gonna actually
thank you.
loop it back to you in just a minute.
Great.
But we're going to talk a little bit about how we've thought about how do we how do we get down to mindsets? Mm-hmm. How do we think about places and kind of reflect and say, wait a minute, I'm digging really deeply in a system. And we all know that systems with the wrong mindset actually doesn't do much or sometimes harm when we're thinking about even the policies that have been put in place under the name of doing good, and then it does not. So we're going to talk a little bit about a framework we're using, and then talk a little bit how we both used it well and misused it.
Not so well.
Yeah.
So one of the frameworks that we love, and we get to partner, Envision gets to partner with New Profit, and they have a framework for systems change called Water of Systems Change, and it's an inverted triangle. And right, Kai knows this because we use this as one of our change management frameworks. And at the top are like the explicit things, explicit conditions in a system: your policies, your practices, your resources. At the middle level are your relationships and the relationship dynamics. And at the very bottom of the triangle is the mindsets. And when you are working on systems change, we often work at that explicit level. What's happening in the handbook, what's happening with people's titles, with the org chart. And then we sometimes go below the green line, if you know that framework, and we get into some of the relationships and the identities that people hold. But really what Jillian and I have learned deeply and we calculated it's almost 50 years of just teaching and doing this work in this space. And we have learned that in order to really get to the transformation, you have to attend to all of those levels, and you have to get to the mindsets. What are the beliefs? What are the values? What are the ideas that the folks in the system or your policies in the system are actually perpetrating and perpetuating, right? Mm-hmm. So if you don't get to the mindsets, which is the hard work, if you don't get to the mindsets, then you're kind of just rearranging, I like to say, deck chairs on the Titanic at the last moment, right? Like you're doing stuff and you're looking busy, but you're not really getting to the transformation. So, yeah.
So when we work down the pyramid, so most of us, if we've run systems, schools, classrooms, dated in our lives, have husbands, spouses, whatever you have, we have set rules, boundaries, structures, all kinds of things to get to the outcome we need to get to. And I know for myself, in different forms, I have said we're going to do race work, we're going to do deep kind of level thinking, identity work, we're going to do land work, like understand kind of people. But what I did is I built all kinds of meetings, and I built structures, and I forced communities to come together, right? I've said we need to kind of make sure we have a class that everybody talks about, and we talk about kind of the work that we're going to do. No one was prepared to do that. No one was prepared to talk about the dichotomy between black and brown. No one was prepared to talk about the understanding of the red line and the experiences of where you live and maybe what your past was. So what I did is I started really on this top and said, we're going to do this thing, right? And everybody's like, yeah. And I'm like, here's the rules, right? Here's the procedures. Here's the structures. Here's how you're going to do it. This is what you should say. I'm going to give you a script, right? And we all have been, whether it's in the education system or beyond, we all have experienced where we're given rules on behavior or ways that we should be thinking about how we interact or how do we actually get things done together that actually does harm because no one is ready to hold it, to allow people the independence in the conversation to even breathe into it, to learn from it. And so that impact took me actually 2 years off my course. So I wanted to get here, so we actually got to the classroom, so we actually were able to make progress, so that kids actually were able to do the projects that I wanted them to do. I wanted them to explore the world. I wanted them to go to different trips. I wanted them to come back and say, this is what we created. But we had stopped the progress because we didn't allow the adults to do it. We didn't allow them to have their own stories because I created rules and structures. If I kind of pause, right, that was a hard part of my career. And when you're in it, you're like, oh, shoot, right? You're sweating.
I would have chosen a different word, but.
Oh, yeah. I said those too. But then when I back up and say, like, rewind or kind of even actually get to a point in my career where I am now, I kind of slow down and say, what's the people work? What's the questions I need to be asking myself because I don't have all the answers? And how do I actually kind of create a forum where we have like-minded folks, where we're asking each other the right questions and we're doing the right kind of development so that when we get to the place of structures, we can hold it. And that's slower. It's methodical. It's about making sure you're really leaning into people so that I can get to an outcome that kids deserve. I got to slow down to speed up. And that was a hard lesson around my own deeper learning, right? I wasn't going deep. I was on the top of the pyramid. I was making rules. Everybody can write a rule. Right now, there is not a lot of rules, but there's a lot of thinking, there's a lot of asking questions, and there's a lot of being wrong. I am wrong, and some of my team are here, you know. Look away. I am wrong 60% of the time, I think, or 80 maybe. But that's the right thing. And even in philanthropy, I've had to learn coming in as a Black woman particularly with a bunch of what I want to do and the structures I want to do doesn't land because I actually have to move the mindset. And it first starts with the mindset that they believe about me, right? Which I now know. I think 20 years ago I kind of rolled in and said, what's the problem, right? But now I have to say, actually, there's a story being told about me that I have to rewrite, and it is my duty and kind of the beauty to bring in my brilliance and rewrite my story so my kids can. And so that's important to me in my journey, but I've had to learn it by kind of going through my pyramid and realizing I actually need to be really clear about all of it. All right, that's my failure. What do you got?
Well, I was on the I won't say a different end of that, but I was a leader. So I was like, since 1995, y'all, I've been steeped in progressive education as a freshman at NYU, and just knowing that this was the type of school. And I was in New York City at the time where all these small schools are flourishing, and I did my student teaching at a small school, integrated studies on 14th Street, and so I was steeped in this, and so I knew this was my world. And all the people that I saw doing deeper learning work were Black and brown. Like, these were mamas who had realized that their kids needed different education, and so they started schools, or they pushed on the school board, or they pushed on the schoolhouse to make sure that their kids were able to tell their story. So in my mind, this is me, these are my people, right? And then you get to spaces where people don't think you belong there. And they do tell a story about your leadership. And I remember being, this wasn't even my first leadership gig at that point, but getting really harmed by a white male. He was my executive director at the time. And it was actually really bad. I didn't realize how bad it was, but I didn't realize that his chipping away at who I was as a leader and as a human had impacted me so much so that then the jobs I took after that job, I was playing really small. And so then I ended up in jobs leading where I was asked to chip even more and play even smaller. And there's but so small you can get. And so, well, you can get smaller, but it's also a very dangerous place to be. And I was also experiencing a lot of grief with my mom passing and that, and it was like a perfect storm to either I gotta get my together, right? But I say all that to say that in my work as developing leaders, like the Deeper Learning Leadership Forum, we are intentional. We are building deeper learning leaders to hold this work, and we have the majority of the folks that are in those cohorts are leaders of color. And I am particular about also making sure that we have a lot of Black women, and if we don't have a lot of Black women in that, we center Black women. That is how we move in that space. And what I have seen from the stories of Black women is we have come with that trauma into our leadership. And then we play small, and we don't ask for what we need, and therefore we don't actually ask for what we need for the kiddos. And so what I have seen and what I have taught in that, and there's Kai in the back, and there's several leaders around, floating around, who've been through this, especially for the Black women. I'm like, listen, humility is overrated. You don't have to be humble. You get to show up in the fullness of your brilliance. You get to show up being everything that you know, everything that you don't, and you get to allow people to move around you. You don't have to contort yourself, right? Because we're really good at that. Race has taught us that in this country, and then also being in a female body has taught us that we have to play nice and we have to play kind and we have to fawn, right? All those things. And so it really is an unlearning that some of our leaders have to do. Now, and to Jillian's point, you have to hold that space so gingerly. Because you're leaders, so yeah, 80% of what you're doing is wrong.
It's 60.
Right?
But, yeah.
It's 60. It's actually only 40 for Jillian, which is really good. But either way, someone thinks whatever you're doing is wrong, right? As a leader. And so, it doesn't work for me to come in with a very critical, heavy hand about this is how you should lead. No, trust yourself. I got to be led by Justin, and one of his first questions every time is like, well, what does your gut say? And then I tell him what my gut said. He's like, that's great, do it. I mean, sometimes I was like, are you sure? Because my gut be off sometimes, but Justin was always supportive, and I learned from that of like, oh, there are different ways that you can cultivate leadership, and I'm really of the mind, we have all survived a pandemic. Yeah. Don't tell me anything about please don't give me critical feedback. I'm at that point. Like we have survived a pandemic. What more do you want from us as humans, right? And I also just have the deep belief. My mom grew plants, and she grew some beautiful plants. And what I know for sure is plants grow in sunlight. They grow towards the light. They will bend themselves towards the light, even if they're far over there. So if we actually want to cultivate leaders to do this work, we also have to be very careful, especially when you're talking about leaders of color and Black women. How do we cultivate and give them the conditions to really thrive and flourish? How do we shine that light? How do we get them close to the sun? How do we shift the sun? How do we shift the conditions so that they are getting what they need in order to thrive? And that also doesn't feel fair to some people sometimes. And that's okay. Equity is not about fairness. Right? Because what I do know is that when Black women show up and they lead in the fullness of themselves, your organization will never be the same. Your kiddos will never be the same. Right? And you all know it because some of y'all had some really good Black leaders. That's why you're in the room, right? Black women who were like leading you. So, but yeah, so what please don't chip away at us as Black women. And Black women, talk your stuff. Be proud. Know what you know. Sit in it. And learn, be a learner. Obviously, that's part of the mindset of being a deeper learning leader. You have to be a learner, but that doesn't always mean that you have to learn from pain and suffering. I will not. I want to learn because there's a summer breeze and the sun is just kissing my face just right, and there's a lesson for me in that. And so create those conditions for your leaders.
Don't you love her podcast voice? It's good. I'm in it. I'm listening to her. But the empowerment is around building, cultivating organizations that allow women of color, all of us, to tell their story. Mm-hmm. And when you start doing that, you actually allow other people to, and our kids to. And that's kind of the slow down, get the mindsets in a place where we're rowing together. I always say that we like to row together at Envision. But it's important to row so that we're all kind of lifting each other up, and the brilliance that's in the room. So that's important. Yeah. Let's hit it.
So you're gonna turn and talk, and maybe you can talk about one of two questions, your choice, or none of these at all. You can talk about what are some mindsets in your system that may be roadblocks for some of the leaders that you have, maybe even leaders of color, and especially Black women. Or you can think about what is a mindset that you have to excavate for yourself that will help you to get to deeper learning for yourself, right? So what's a mindset that you're seeing in your system that might be a roadblock, and then what's a mindset that might be a roadblock within yourself. And I'm going to invite you to lean into something that Jillian does very well. She's a very vulnerable leader. And so I know that's tough, but thinking about that second question invites vulnerability, which is important in leadership. So turn and talk. Maybe how many minutes? 3? No? 3? And then we'll take questions, right? So, yep. Yeah. So turn and talk. Get to know each other. Introduce yourselves, your name, your role. Oh, use the mic. Yeah, that's right. My producer would tell me to do that on the podcast. So it's called Street Data Pod. And I will have to say, we get to interview some really awesome people. And this season, we've been focusing on the intergenerational gap between like teachers of a different generation. We were talking about that.
Don't say it. We are still very young.
We used to be the youngest one. Stanley. Stanley was a science teacher at CAT. We used to be the young ones in the room with all the energy. And now, in our minds, we're more younger than we actually are. So anyway, this episode, this season, we've been talking with lots of folks intergenerationally who've been in this work for a while, and kind of what wisdom would they carry on. So, listen. Yes. Anyone want to share a mindset shift or mindset that they're noticing coming up in their system, or a mindset if you want to be vulnerable, you get all the points. A mindset shift that you need to interrupt.
Jillian? We just visited the Angela Davis exhibit in Oakland, which folks should go to. It's really great if you can.
Yes.
And I also had the privilege of being taught by her. And as I was walking the exhibit, I was like, I remember what she said. It's true. But one thing she said that kind of stuck with me and was also repeated in the exhibit, and it's been kind of my guiding light, is that we have to keep imagining a world that we're actually not going to be a part of. Yeah. And you have to visualize it, and you have to think about it, and you have to be excited about it, and you have to keep talking about it. And get to the point of being okay that you're actually not going to be there because you're living a legacy. And so the more we have the opportunity to talk about that legacy, the more we have the opportunity to believe that our imperfection can actually grow, right? But both our strengths can grow and become something larger than ourselves, but so can all the failures that we have done, right? Our nation is built off of failure. Yeah. And people like really growing out of that and becoming stronger people. And so that kind of conversation, allowing for that to kind of become part of your story, part of the lineage as you're thinking about your future, is where I've kind of maintained hope in times where I didn't know I was doing that. It's been my resiliency, and it's been my charge. So that's kind of what's kept me going.
And I would say phone a friend. Like, there are times where I just have to be like, listen, I can't see it. Somebody get me out of this. And I call my most joyful, hopeful friend, and I'm explicit. I'm like, listen, Laureen, I need you to change my mindset about this. And she's like, okay, I got you. Okay, I'm going to vent for 3 minutes, but I need you to help me change. And she'll listen. Shane is also very good with that. She's like masterful at the listening piece. And she's like, okay, are you ready for me to shift you out? And I'm like, yes, I'm ready. I've gotten it out. And now here's for the shift. And she'll say something. Sometimes she'll just reframe something that I've said. Other times she'll just say, listen, you tripping. Like, stop, right? But phone a friend. Like, you can't dream. I love what you said about dreaming and like moving in that space. And you can't really dream alone. Like Jamila Dugan, who wrote the book, Dr. Jamila Dugan wrote the book, Street Data with Shane. She talks about radical dreaming, and Robin D.G. Kelly, Dr. Robin D.G. Kelly talks about freedom dreaming, right? Like, you have to dream. And so that means you have to play, and sometimes you have to drink a lot of tequila. That's also, like, listen. I do love tequila. It's my happy place. So, like, also think about your happy place. Like, you don't have to always stay in the space. In our fellowship, we do this thing where you have a guided visualization and conversation with your future liberated self. And it is one of the most powerful things because, like butterflies, like caterpillars, Stanley will tell me if I'm correct or not because he's a science person. Caterpillars contain the butterfly parts in them, and then when they're in the cocoon and they digest themselves and they emerge as the butterfly. So the caterpillar is both the caterpillar and the butterfly at the same time, and I have to think that we are also that. And so, feed that hope. And also, yeah, you're that too. So engage with that at the same time that you might be engaging in struggle. You're also like hopeful. So don't let anybody steal your joy. And you can always go to a beach. Like I tell Jillian, people are like, how are you so happy? It's like, 'cause half the time y'all are talking and I'm at a beach drinking a tequila.
It's true.
It's like, listen, that's I'm hearing you, but I'm also not hearing you. So yes, gentlemen in the back, and then we'll come up to the front. Yeah. We were talking about this earlier.
Yeah.
And I am proud to say that I've had some really wonderful Black women leaders, and I've had some really horrible ones. Right? Real talk. And so what I learned is, there are like the race or the gender or any other identity marker doesn't actually contribute to whether you are a good leader or not. I think it gave me the opportunity to really pay attention to how I felt underneath someone's leadership. Right? There are times that I have been in organizations that have been completely Black women run and did not feel the same security or sense of safety, right? Because they wanted me to show up in a particular way, in a particular tradition that wasn't necessarily authentically me at times, right? And at the same time, the white man that I worked for actually was an actual white supremacist. Like actually it was like came out and that was all the reasons why he had made my life a living hell for the time that I worked underneath him. But I also knew what that felt like in my body. It felt unnecessarily stressful and tense, and I didn't even understand it until I was out of it for a while and could heal from it, right? And so I do think that those experiences have taught me that what I want most of all as a leader is for people to feel like they can show up fully, make their mistakes, learn and grow, and then kiss me goodbye as they move on to their next leadership endeavor. I want to make sure that people leave. I think about my mom. She'd always say, make a space better than, leave a space better than you found it. And I also like to do that with people. Not meaning I'm not putting on a cape, I'm not saving anybody, but I can see the ways in which if you are needing support, then I can ask, what's the support you need? If you are needing kudos, a big cheerleader, I can do that. And so I've just learned to pay attention to the people that I'm leading and to ask them what it is that they need from me and then figure out how to do and be that. Or to shift them to somebody else who can. Go talk to Justin about that. I can't help you, right? Or go talk to Jillian. She can tell you on how to, she can help you be this a little bit more of that. I'm not that polished, is what I would say, right? So I really appreciate that question. I'm going to do more thinking about it because that's a beautiful question to journal around. But for me, that's what it was. I realized I wanted to feel a particular way, and I know what that feeling looks like in other people's bodies. Right? It's like, and you observe that and you ask, even in those small glimmers of okay, what's going on with you right now? How is that feeling? And how can we make more of that feeling so that you can be who you need to be or who you want to be in this role?
Yeah. I have been equally oppressed by Black women and just leaders. Yeah. If I kind of add it up and do my math, white supremacy culture hits us all. And it certainly has a parking lot in leadership and what people think they need to do and believe in and behave as a leader. So it hits more for me when it's a woman of color, a Black woman who is also kind of superimposing those beliefs, and equally more powerful when they're vulnerable and they're able to kind of say, this is going to be hard and let me help you. And I think it's been hard when you have white folks that are kind of buckle it up, figure it out, work harder. And I think I've had both of those experiences. I think what I often am looking for, and sometimes it's hard to find, so I'm really trying to be myself, is the vulnerability. It is hard to do this job. I'm walking a white man's job.
Say that again. Wait, say that again. Say
which
why.
One? It's hard to do this job, or am I?
And say more, because we talked about this. And say more what you mean
now she's getting
by
to podcast. Here we go. I'll say more.
Thank you.
Leadership it's historically been made and developed for white men, white culture, white supremacy culture. And so that in order to get there, to survive there, to be there, you need to adopt that culture. And we have in many ways. And you have to get at the table and be able to kind of have that conversation. And so I have to make a choice consciously around when I'm going to bring myself to the table, right? Or when it's a fad to bring myself to the table, right? It was 2 months ago, really exciting to say pro-Black. Right now I need to soften it to DEI work, right? So it's like, what story are you kind of bringing, or when are you going to kind of just bring yourself, or when do you actually, for the name of the kids, kind of dance with the devil and say what you got to say? And I have done all three, right? There's been times in my career where I've said, I will take money from anyone to make sure I'm serving kids. And there's been times where it's, no, actually the partnership, you need to be in line with me. But it's whatever it takes so that I can make sure that kids have a better story than I did, right? And so not all of us have to make those choices. And so it's important to me to be vulnerable about that. Stand beside somebody I care about in my organization, kind of tell my story, you're telling your story, and make sure that I am there to kind of say, we are going to make sure that we're being honest about the work. We're being honest about what's hard, the failures that are there, because we do need to make sure that the people that are behind us that actually have a future, right? Because Envision's going to stand beyond me. But our students who hopefully will run Envision, that's the goal for me at least.
Yeah, right.
Right? The country, what they move so that you can have a story that is not prohibited, where you have to figure out what story to tell at the table. And so that has been both oppressed, getting back to your question, because I went on my own tangent. But that has been both oppressed and a silence by folks who are trying to get above. And it's most painful when it's people of color. And that has kind of put me in a place where, you know, we're a vulnerable organization. I want us to become a vulnerable organization, so it's a home for people of color. Thanks for that question. That was awesome.
That's a great question.
That is hot.
She's also an amazing breath worker right there.
Yes,
Like she's done,
that
we've
makes
done
me
some
want to
breath work.
breathe. That's good.
Oh, okay. I could go. Okay. I think what has been destroyed for me personally, is like the endless self-doubt. Like no more. It's like I'll rethink something a couple of times, but then like I don't got time. I have learning to do. So I make a decision, I'll either learn from it or I'll win. You either win or you learn, but there's no losses in my book. And I think so I have been very particular about who can pour into me and set boundaries around that, right? But I've done that. I'm stopping that, or I've torn that aspect down so I can listen to the voices that actually build me up, whether they come from my ancestors, or they come from my own self-talk, or they come from the colleagues that I get to work with, who are great listeners and who see me for who I am. So because I'm no longer allowing people to chip away at me, and people will do that not for malicious reasons. Sometimes it's like they don't believe they're that great either. That's what I've learned. A lot of leaders actually are very self-conscious. So they're like, I don't know how to do this, and I believe you don't know how to do this. And so I'm going to act like you don't know how to do this. Right? Right? So I'm like, now I just call it. I was like, I think you're projecting your incompetence on me. Might that be what's happening? And you'd be surprised. People are like, I didn't think about that. That is, yeah. Maybe it's not, but I know what I'm doing. I don't know if you know what you're doing, but that's fine. You don't have to know what you're doing, but please don't act like I don't know what I'm doing, because I do know what I'm doing, including I know I'm making a mess sometimes, right? I'll be like, Justin, I did a thing. Just get my back. But so I will say that so that I've stopped allowing people to chip away at me so that I can actually hear their stories and hear my voice and be able to share my story with confidence. What are you stopping? What are you building? What are you destroying?
Look, I'm going to tell you what I'm still working on. I will minimize my intelligence sometimes still, right? Because I can read the room, right? I'm intuitive enough. I'm kind of involved enough to know when I'm kind of hitting a roof for some folks, where I'm making them a little uncomfortable with just being who I am. And so I have found myself, I've gotten much better, right? Usually I say the thing, I'm not very shy, but I do find myself at times pausing and just kind of asking a question when I know the answer. And I need to stop asking the question, because I actually know those answers.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah, I'm sure you've seen me do it, because I have to stop myself and be like, wait a minute, I actually am not interested in what you have to say, because I already know. Right. So there's sometimes that happens. I also need to stop apologizing for what I know. Because I oftentimes, I'm so sorry. Right. I've done that weird stuff. And women do that, and particularly Black women, women of color, we escalate it. We do it 3 times more.
Yeah.
And I don't know what I'm apologizing for because I still was right again. I was right. I'm not sure. I was right when I asked the question. I was right when. So there's an element there where I'm trying to protect people from being surprised. And maybe it's even myself if I'm gonna get real deep, right? Like I don't want to handle your surprise. Then I have to explain it. Right. So if I'm gonna get real deep there, right, I'm getting deeper in my deeper learning right now.
You're deep.
I'm deep.
Yeah,
I'm protecting myself from having to explain why I know what I know.
Ooh.
Yeah. And that will stop.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Ooh.
I know.
That was good.
I felt it. It felt good.
That's it. You felt it.
I
You
felt
felt it in your body. That was so good.
But what's good about that is me getting into my brilliance is actually I could feel it's helpful for other people.
Yes.
And that's the beauty of each one of us just kind of letting ourselves be who we are. Yeah. It makes each and every one of us better. Yeah. Right?
Oh, that was so good.
Oh, that was fun.
That was so good.
Let's open up a podcast again about it. This is going to be us.